women who didn't want that aspirational feel. And that's where the market expanded. And Victoria's Secret didn't need to be for everyone. Let's talk about the Joker.
Another we need a sound effect for absolute brand disasters. You know, like the sinking of the Titanic is essentially what they did is they took a brand that was spectacular. The Joker is the first R-rated movie ever to get $1 billion in ticket sales.
That's a crazy stat.
The first ever. It's not Batman. It's the Joker. And an intellectual analysis of why that is worth doing. But you have this movie that did so well, and then somebody somewhere in a studio, executives, in-house advisors decide to do the Joker 2, and in the shortest time span ever, absolutely destroy a brand, right? But by betraying all of the trust with the audience in terms of what people expected from the Joker. How do you explain you going from a $50 million budget for the Joker 1 and $1 billion in revenue, and then a $300 million budget and no revenue? How does that decision-making get there, and why would you explain it? And for those of you who don't know, The Joker came out as a musical with Lady Gaga, and it totally went against what The Joker represented in the first movie and tried to kind of create a reality that people thought the Joker should be in this kind of politically correct world.
I'm really shocked by the decision-making that is happening within industries where I would assume they're smarter than I. You know, like I was actually excited to see the Joker 2 when I saw the billboards go up because the first movie was so uncanny. Like it was so, in a scary way, captivating to be kind of reminded that like people like us, like that, like the Joker could walk kind of among us, which was like really the core kind of point of that movie is that like these people who are like shat on by society, you know, like, and are so angry and so fueled and so dangerous, you know, just can kind of walk the streets and like, they're kind of there. I thought the addition of Lady Gaga was intriguing because there's something kind of Harlequin about her.
No, she could have been used to great effect.
Yeah.
But
I also don't think singing also bothers me. I just don't think that that's the role of the Joker. You know, like her role or addition could have been one with song without needing to change the framework. It doesn't bother me. Like, I think that there's a version of a screenplay where there's like a Harlequin figure that maybe like hums or like sings after she kills somebody.
Oh, look, if they wanted to make the Joker into a musical, that's a different angle, right? Like, you know,
but I'm not saying making it a musical. I'm just saying like, I just don't know how many decisions were made to get to the point where they completely strayed away from what made the original movie a success.
This is my question. Part of me thinks it's actually a deliberate act by people who have who have control over the content to kind of almost ruin something to make a political point. Because like, if you were to put the concept on a piece of paper to 50 smart humans about the proper way to do a sequel to the Joker, I don't think anybody would select bringing in a musical element, calling it Folie à Deux, and then turning the brand upside down. Like Phoenix hated it from the whole thing. Like he was signed on to do it, but you know, like they detest the actual content. I think it hurt Lady Gaga. I think a few people tried to make a point, ruined a brand, hurt careers, you know. And I don't hear anybody getting fired from it. But I want to understand.
But that's where I'm struggling with this. Is like it seems so obvious from where we're sitting because. It just doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense how like movie after movie is just like hitting these politically correct boxes, but are providing no context, no story, nothing of meaning, and it's not working. And I don't know who's approving this.
It's almost like there's this insistence to prove a point, and they can get away with it because Marvel Comics is showing that the more politically correct it's getting, the less money it's making, right? And then the Joker comes out and is like just it's a painful movie in terms of dealing with uncomfortable stuff. Incredibly non-politically correct, but it's not even focused on that. And then and it gets $1 billion, and then it's like somebody wants to prove a point. It's almost like the Lord of the Rings on Amazon, just a complete disaster because they're ruining what people love about the brand. Like, and they're doing it deliberately.
But that isn't confusing. Like, that's what I don't understand is like the Joker as a movie, there was nothing in it that really it revolved around politically correct messaging. So why the second version has to have that enforcement? It just shows that there's something that we're missing by way of like clearly they wanted to make this more relevant and part of what they think is the zeitgeist.
I actually think there's a Trump element to it, controversial or not, like because the Joker reflected kind of an incel population that has grown in influence in Western society. These men who are kind of hiding and who get upset and have a propensity for violence. That's a reality that's existing. The movie captured it, and guess what happened? People went and watched it. And it was like, we're going to say, well, no, we don't really agree with the concept of incels, and we don't really like what it's doing, so we're going to make a movie that corrects this. So it's movie.
But I don't know. But like, how does that get approved at a $300 million budget when there's pure data to show by way of ticket sales that there's a massive, like it was kind of like a car wreck. Like it was a complete ambivalence to this movie of like, it's horrifying to watch, but you can't look away.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what made that movie so compelling in the way that Joaquin Phoenix played the part is that he perfectly captured that like insane person that can sneak through the cracks and exist in society.
And he built on Heath Ledger's performance. Like
Totally.
he kind of like
that's what made the Joker so captivating is what Heath Ledger achieved in The Dark Knight. Like it's this kind of person that walks among us that we're the most afraid of because their insanity is just they're so functional in their insanity. And like that's what's so scary to us. Because you hear about these, these horrific, and you can't who is that person?
Or the dark thoughts that exist on the edge of all of our consciousness that people, but there are people who like really dwell in those areas and hide.
But I think there's an actual fascination for us to understand the psyche of these crazy. Like that's why even the Dylan Klebold, like there was so much documentaries on like what this kid was like before Columbine, and even when you look at Mindhunter and there's just such a fascination on the psychology of how do you become this? So to have this movie that actually captured it in a really eerie way,
art is on the edge.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like if you're making something that's going to be great and artistic, you have to push boundaries and be on the edge to get people's attention. The Joker did that. Phoenix and Ledger did that. And then all of a sudden you put Phoenix into a script that's designed to take away all of the edge. And from my perspective, even with a legal background, if I was a shareholder of Warner Brothers, I would want to be suing Warner Brothers because you're right. Like, how do you make that decision? Who made that decision to lose $200 million on a film and ruin a brand? Because that brand could have been a multi-billion-dollar brand that you could have got 4 or 5 from.
But there's something larger to this that I just don't know really how we provide commentary. It's like the stat was every movie almost that came out in 2024, maybe it's 2025, it's like a remake or a sequel version. Why is there no budget for original screenplays? Or how are we in this it's larger than the Joker too. How are we getting to this place? What are we missing? And that's what I'm kind of struggling with is when all I hear is that these things aren't working and they're not getting sales. What is the thinking pattern if everything is driven by at least money in TV?
Well, it's not driven, I guess, in today's society just by money because nobody gets fired. I think why it's relevant to some of our listeners is the same thing is happening in business, right? Like you have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, right? And then all of a sudden you can't use dwarfs because it's bad for dwarfs. And then you have a Hispanic person playing, a white character, which you couldn't do. All of these things to try to socially policy or, to preach to people are economic failures. It's good real stories from real communities work. And I think it's happening in business where, businesses are suffering because they're doing the same thing that movie producers are doing on Amazon and Netflix, is it's just kind of diluting everything into nothingness.
Well, I think where I feel like we can have a relevant conversation on this, or to what we do, the brands, the products, the things that are really killing it right now by way of like measurable statistics are things that are controversial. They're not things that are racist. They're not things that are sexist. They're not things that necessarily need to be political, but they're things that are being authentic to what they are, and they're being unapologetic in that execution. Like, the number one podcast is Call Her Daddy, right? Like, the top influencers are people like Lauren Bostic. Like, they're these more of like exposed personalities that are prepared to be more raw and unfiltered than these constructed narratives that are designed to show how polite they are.
Yeah. Well, brands are being hijacked by political agendas, and it's infiltrated top decision making.
But we need a core takeaway. Like, how does this, like, that I'm not interested in touching that from a like, how do you learn from this? Because the problem is if people are seeing all of these movies going out, that's what the problem is with the business owner's mindset is. They're like, this is what the people want.
This is the zeitgeist that we have to do, but they're forgetting they're all losing money.
But this is the difficult area that we have to navigate, is that what we're seeing that's working by way of metrics that you care about, which is like sales, conversions, what's doing well, is not the things that these big society markers are telling you that's working.
That's why the role of good advisors is so important. So like, if they would have hired me, you have an audience that clearly liked it, right? What I would do is sample 10,000 people who love the original Joker, and then get from them what they would like to see from that character. What are the most interesting things, right? Like, they weren't speaking to the customer who bought the product. They decided to betray the customer, and that's why it's a disaster. Their numbers would be far worse if you could get refunds, because everybody I've talked to says people are walking out of the movie halfway through. So they're getting some sales, but if it was refunded, they'd have almost none, because people won't stay through the whole movie. It's that bad.
Well, you get a refund if you leave early.
I've never seen that. I didn't know that. I don't think most people know that. There's your public service announcement. If the movie sucks, go get a refund.
You can actually leave and get a refund if you're like, this is
Have
brutal.
you done that?
No, but I know.
How do you know this?
Because I knew people that did it for The Hobbit.
For The Hobbit?
Yeah.
Number 1, 2, or 3, or just
I don't
the
know.
first
This was
one?
a few years ago, but it was the same one that I walked out of because I'm like, this is horrible. Not for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Not for me. But I think that we should circle back on that point, because I think that's really the only point that I want to make with the Joker. And it's that why the Joker failed for the second movie is because they did not understand who their customer was and who their target market is. And that's where having conversations about things that are politically correct are difficult, because in order to criticize it, therefore makes you a bad person. But when people don't like something that completely verged from the original product that was successful, that's when you have a brand problem. And we're in a really crappy time where we can't criticize things that are designed to be polite. And polite doesn't work for a lot of things. And you need to understand when to do something and when it makes sense for your brand, depending on what your goals are. And with the Joker being the first R-rated movie to make $1 billion, for the second movie to have a $300 million investment versus a $50 million investment was clearly under the direction to surpass the sales made in the first movie. And to do that without understanding what made that so culturally relevant and iconic, and to miss that mark, is the takeaway for you as a brand owner, that it doesn't matter what you think the zeitgeist is, you need to speak to a customer. And that's a very different directive.
And it just emphasizes that there is huge incompetence at the highest levels, even though we assume they're all smarter than us at every stage.
And I actually think that's why it's a great time to be a small or medium-sized business, because the big brands are so clunky. They're so incapable. They can't get anything done. They're listening to so many voices and decision makers. And especially with public companies, it's very difficult, because the people that sit on the boards, the executive teams, nobody wants to put anything forward that pushes the boundary because they don't want to be the person that gets late. They're so afraid without actually any real context to what gets canceled, of cancelability, that they play so safe. It's like they're in like bubble wrap, like they're rolling in these bubble wrap balls, because even anything close to like a second sequel to the Joker 2 that would be like darker, pushing the boundaries further, is just so insensitive to the time, and nobody wants to be that person in case it goes bad. Mm-hmm. And when they're getting so much soundboarding from the same level of thinking, where everyone just wants to keep their second and third vacation homes, and they all just want to get paid, and they want to go home without stress, or they don't want to have that fear of the potential of something, even though it's completely so unreasonable, they're not getting anything done that's interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to some top executive coaches when I was in LA, and we were brainstorming, and it's almost in corporations, in order to get to the top, you have to be risk averse. Like, you have to be promoted, so you can't stick your neck out. And if you do what you're told, you'll end up moving up the chain and get promoted. But for companies, the CEO has to be creative, has to be willing to accept a bit of risk, but the selection process to get there almost deselects people out. And so now you have people leading these corporations who don't have the ability to build a brand or be dynamic because there's no creativity or risk tolerance.
Oh, and it's, even when you think about, yes, but I think it's even kind of actually more complicated than that. Like, there's so many CEOs or C-suite executives we'll talk to that like will really agree with your opinion, or they'll really like your content, and they're like, yeah, I can't say that, can't touch that. Even though I agree with that, they're like, yeah, it's just, it's just not worth it. I don't want to deal with Joanne from HR. Like, it's at a point where nobody feels like they can say anything that actually creates dialogue and discourse, but because they don't want friction.
Yeah, but I would say to a CEO whose compensation is not just salary based, but it's performance based, like they got options or whatever. If you want to make a difference, not taking anything away from your path to get to CEO, but ask yourself, do you really have the creative curiosity to take it to the next level? Because you need it. And we all want to think we have it all, and you got to that position. But if you really want to like hit the jackpot on your options, you got to bring in an advisor who can say what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
I've got such a perfect example that I want to touch on. We recently watched The Party by Peter Sellers, and it was crazy for me to watch this movie because this was something that my dad has referenced throughout my life without realizing like what movie it came from. And I was shocked when I watched the movie because I was like, well, one, I mean, this would like never pass today. And it like, I had to actually work through the discomfort of like seeing someone pretend to be an Indian man and like work through like all of the different arguments of like, why couldn't you hire an Indian person to do this role? And but once I kind of, it was really interesting because we had Googled it and done some research afterwards, and it was crazy that it was like literally the #1 movie in India.
Yeah. So the segue is The Party, starring Peter Sellers, plays an East Indian man who comes to Hollywood, and he's just unbelievable method actor. And your point that people in India, it became their most favorite movie. And
it's so interesting to like, one, this would never be done today, and two, the question, is, does it need to? But then three, it's like, this was such an iconic movie. It was really loved by so many people. And like the quotes and the things that came out of the method acting, like became really culturally relevant and prolific. And it's really seen as one of the best movies. And it's not necessarily always the case, but it's something to consider in wanting to push the boundaries, is that true art form also comes from like pushing the boundaries, but also accepting what is. Like what made the Joker so successful is that we have this real fear right now of these like crazy people that live on the fringes that can get access to like things like guns. And that was really the Joker's role in The Dark Knight. It's like he had these guns, he was like hiring all these convicts, they were like mastery breaking down banks and stuff. And it's kind of what's going on in the US in a different scale with these mass murders.
I highly recommend people watch The Party. just for the aesthetic, like it was one of the most pioneering films of its time in terms
Yeah.
of how it follows segments.
It's
and
chaos, yeah.
But how it moves is amazing. And that, what's that phrase? Birdie num nums? I didn't know that's where it came from.
Num-num. So my dad would like, I still have yet to, I got to record a segment of me telling my dad I watched the movie, and just, he's not even really going to respond. He's just going to shout lines at me from the movie because like he just loved the movie so much.
Birdie num nums. But that, there's not enough of that out there anymore, that type of art anymore.
I mean, even like, these are the greatest movies, like White Chicks, you know, like the Wayans brothers going, like, these are the movies that I've probably watched White Chicks, I think probably the most of almost any movie I've ever seen, because
really? Never watched it once.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny. And growing up, like, I just thought it was the funniest thing to have the Wayans brothers like make fun of blonde Valley Girl White Chicks. Like to me it was hilarious. And that's a movie that we quoted forever. And this isn't a call for movies that make fun of races. It's just that we need to be able to have these conversations without fear of reprisal.
I like it from a perspective of Mormons versus some other religions.
Oh, with the Book of Mormon,
right? Like the Book of Mormon, they don't threaten to blow up the theater that's playing it. They actually go. And as a family, they kind of laugh at this amazing musical. Like, we need to embrace that a bit more.
But that's not a conversation that I necessarily feel I need to have, other than I just feel like we should not be afraid of discourse. Like, that's like, just, we should be able to have a conversation and to test ideas and subjects that are outside of your comfort zone, because that's where art is made.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. How do we get on the party?
I brought that up because I was thinking about where we've lost the art of good movies.